guys, welcome to Blondes and A Brokerage. Today we are going to chat about concessions and how they work in the contract, because they are sometimes kind of a weird kind of taboo thing. People see a concession and they're like, I'm not giving you that money. But then a concession can also happen in a loan. It can happen towards closing costs. There's a lot of different options of what a concession can do. So
I think the problem too is that buyers don't really understand how a concession works. Like, I think overall buyer looks at a purchase price or a contract price and doesn't really, like, they think that the best thing for them is the lowest price.
Right.
And I think that's not the case for most buyers. I think for most buyers, yes, you need a good price, right? Whatever that means in this market, but cash to close is huge.
Yeah.
So to me, dropping $10,000 on the purchase price may drop my payment $50, let's say.
Right.
But having to bring $10,000 less to closing and having that money available for something else or a different investment, I would much rather have money in the bank, especially, with inflation the way it is and interest rates the way they are and, the uncertainty of the stock market, everything. I would rather have cash available, if possible. And so I think that's why concessions become important, because to a buyer, so the way concessions work in a contract is, like, let's say you're purchasing a property for $550,000. And instead of asking for a $10,000 price reduction, you're going to ask for $10,000 in concessions. And the reason that is the same to the seller is because their net amount is the same. They're either going to reduce the purchase price or they're going to give the buyer $10,000 towards their closing costs. But to the buyer, it's very different, because the purchase price may stay the same, right, their loan amount, but because they're getting that $10,000 towards their closing costs, now their cash to close is $10,000 less. And for people that are using down payment assistance, it's huge to be able to have that ability too. And that may be the difference between using down payment assistance and going into a 3.5% or 5% loan, which is a lot more favorable to a buyer. So if you're able to negotiate concessions, that to me is like the biggest win in a contract, in my opinion. And people are always like, oh yay, the market is shifting and I'm going to be able to do price reductions. And it's like, I would always just rather see a buyer get concessions when given the option. And so,
especially when it doesn't affect the seller.
Right.
It's like, do what's right for the buyer.
Exactly. And you can also use those concessions to buy down the rate. And with rates as high as they are right now, that might be a great option for a buyer. That might be the difference between them being able to afford the property and not. And so I would just like us to see us go into more of like the concession mindset versus just straight into a price reduction. If the price reduction is necessary, then obviously, right. Or maybe it's a combination of both. I have a friend that just wrote an offer in Michigan. She needed to use both, really. The property was overpriced, and I was like, well, instead of going all the way down into what you think, why don't you, negotiate your concessions, and do some price reduction, some concessions, so that it benefits you as well. I think that concessions are huge, and as we do see the market, shift into this new phase, you're going to see a lot more ability to use concessions.
Right.
And, that money in your pocket can be new carpet and new paint. It could be a rate buy down. And so I just feel like you have a lot more flexibility with that $10,000 or whatever, $2,000 to $5,000 to $10,000. Doesn't have to be $10,000. You have a lot more flexibility as a buyer to have that money in your pocket versus just have that $50 a month in your payment.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
You can do a lot more with actual cash as opposed to reduction of payment.
Like we started off, a concession doesn't have to be right off the bat. That can be, hey, we got our inspection done, and instead of seller doing these 4 items, why don't you just give us a $4,000 concession? And that'll go towards the client's closing costs. That's less money they have to bring to the table, and then they have the funds to handle those inspection items later. So there's a lot of different options within the contract that can happen. Yeah. And it's simply done with an amendment. There may be times where a lender wants to just have specific verbiage or things that come through.
Yep.
So it's another way to kind of benefit your client in whatever market we're in.
And I like the piece about like inspection, because that is, as we're able to ask for inspection items now, which we haven't been able to for the past like 18 months, as that comes back into play, I think that's a huge piece of it, because some people want everything done before they move into the house.
Mm-hmm.
Some people want to know it's done right, and the only way to really know that is to have hired the contractors yourself or done it yourself or whatever. So I see both sides of it, whereas I'm more of the person that I just want it done, and to know it's done before I move in. But I have plenty of clients that would much rather know that they know who's doing the work to get it done. And so negotiating for concessions after going under contract after inspection items is a great option for people.
It is, and that's typically when they come into play, aside from, you go to show your house and you're like, okay, we need all new carpet and the floors need to be refinished, and that's gonna cost roughly $4,000. So let's just offer asking price, offer in the $4,000, and then there's always room for negotiation. I mean, that's the other beauty to concessions is it's not $10,000. It can be $500. It can be $75. It can be whatever you want it to be, and it's open for negotiation. So kind of shoot for the stars. Let the seller decide. Same with being on the selling side. Going into it, hey, when we listed, we knew these, X, Y, and Z had to happen. We knew somebody might ask for it. What are you willing to give up to what that estimate might be? So yeah, it's just a great way to try to benefit on both sides. So.
And I think too, if you have a property which we're also going to see more of this, a property that's sitting on the market, and say you've gotten the feedback several times that the fence is in really bad condition and needs to either be repaired, replaced, or repainted, and maybe your client doesn't have the funds to do that, you can, at that point, when you've received that feedback multiple times, you can come back and just say, the seller's willing to offer a credit at closing for those items, and then they don't have to pay that money up front, right? That just comes out of their net proceeds. So concessions can be a great option for sellers and for buyers when you get in that situation with inspection items or negative feedback or whatever.
And we're going to start seeing that a lot more now.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, the last 18, 24 months, I have never seen a concession come through, nor have I written one for a buyer. So now we can kind of start to utilize that to our benefit, and it doesn't affect the seller's net. So as long as they're good with it, it's however it works for the buyer.
Yep,
so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, if you have any questions about concessions and how they can benefit you in this market, or you're a seller looking to get your property under contract and you're struggling, please reach out to us and we'd be happy to answer any of your questions.